I never thought I'd need a locksmith's number memorized like a phone number for my own child. But there it was, saved under emergency do not ignore, right next to the number for my doctor. That's what it had come to in my own house, the one my husband Malcolm and I had paid off over 26 years, brick by brick, holiday by cancelled holiday. My name is Eileen Whitfield. I'm 63 years old, and until 8 months ago I lived alone in a 3-bedroom house on Chelston Road in Torquay, close enough to smell the sea on a windy morning. Malcolm passed 4 years back. Sudden, the way he'd have wanted it, though it left me with a house too big and a silence I never got used to. Then my son Adam called. His wife Priya's parents, Raj and Kama, had lost their flat in Exeter, a landlord selling up. Tenants given 6 weeks. Would I mind, just for a little while, if they stayed with me? I said yes before he'd finished the sentence. That's what mothers do. That's what I thought love looked like. 6 weeks became 3 months. 3 months became a spare room turned permanent, a second car parked crooked in my drive, and a kitchen that no longer felt like mine. Kama rearranged my cupboards the second week, said it made more sense her way. I let it go. You let things go when you love your son and you don't want to be the mother-in-law who complains. But it wasn't just the cupboards. It was the morning I came downstairs to find Raj had moved my late husband's armchair, Malcolm's chair, the one nobody sits in, the one I dust every Sunday like a small ceremony, out to the garage. It was blocking the telly, Raj said, not even looking up from his paper. I stood in my own sitting room and said nothing, because saying something felt like starting a war I wasn't sure I'd win. It was the day I found my bank statements, my post already opened on the kitchen table, and Kama saying, breezy as anything, I thought it might be important, so I had a look. As if that explained it. As if that made it right. It was the locks. That's the part that still makes my hands go cold when I think of it. I came back from my sister's in Paynton to find the back door lock changed. Not the front to back, the one I use every single day to get to the garden, to my washing line, to the little bench where I sit with my tea and wash the gulls. A new lock, new keys. And when I asked why, Raj said, almost gentle, like he was doing me a favor, Adam thought it best. For security. We'll get you a copy sorted. They never did. I want to be fair here, because fairness matters to me, even now, even after everything. Raj and Kama are not cruel people in the way you'd see in a film. They didn't shout. They didn't threaten. They simply took, quietly, steadily, the way water takes the shape of whatever container you put it in, except the container was my life, and they were filling every inch of it. And my Adam, who I raised on my own some years when Malcolm was working the rigs, who I taught to ride a bike on this very street. Adam looked the other way. Every time. Mom, they're going through a hard time. Mom, it's not forever. Mom, can't you just be patient? Patient. I had been patient for 8 months while I became a guest in my own home. I ate dinner alone in my room some nights because the kitchen was busy. I stopped inviting my friends round because I was embarrassed by what my house had become, cluttered with things that weren't mine, decisions that weren't mine, a life rearranged without a single vote cast in my name. There's a particular kind of loneliness that comes from being surrounded by people and still invisible. I didn't understand it until I lived it. The turning point came on a Tuesday in March. Gray sky, the kind Torquay gets in early spring that makes the sea look like pewter. I'd gone to see my solicitor, Mr. Fenwick, about updating my will, a small, ordinary errand, nothing dramatic. But sitting in his office, looking at the paperwork with my name on the deed, my name alone, something in me went very still and very clear. This house was mine, not Adam's, not Priya's parents'. Mine and Malcolm's, built from our sweat, and now mine to protect. I asked Mr. Fenwick a simple question. If I have people living in my house who aren't tenants, who have never paid rent, who I never formally invited to stay a long term, what are my rights? He looked at me over his glasses and said something I've turned over in my mind every day since. Mrs. Whitfield, the law is usually clearer than families make it feel. The question isn't what's fair to everyone. The question is, what is your home, and who decided it stopped being yours? I drove home that day with a folder of paperwork on the passenger seat and a plan starting to take shape, quiet and cold as the sea outside my window. I didn't tell Adam. I didn't tell Priya. I certainly didn't tell Raj and Kama, who were, at that very moment, probably rearranging something else of mine without asking. Because here is the thing nobody warns you about when you become a mother, then a widow, Then apparently a landlord in your own house. Kindness without boundaries doesn't get you love. It gets you erased. I wasn't going to shout. I wasn't going to cry in front of them. Though God knows I'd done enough of that alone at night, lying in a bed in a house that no longer felt like my own. I was going to do something quieter than that. Something they wouldn't see coming. Because people who take without asking never imagine the person they're taking from might finally decide to ask for it all back. That evening, I made a phone call I'd been putting off for weeks. Not to Adam, not to a mediator, to Mr. Fenwick's office to confirm an appointment for the following Monday, one that would set in motion something Raj and Kama had no idea was coming. I sat in my garden that night, on the little bench they hadn't managed to move yet, and I looked up at the house, my house, glowing warm against the dark, filled with people who had stopped seeing me as anything but useful. Soon, I thought, they would see me very clearly indeed. Monday came gray and blustery, the kind of Torquay morning where the palm trees on the seafront bend sideways and the tourists give up and go home early. I told Kama I had a hospital appointment. It wasn't entirely a lie. Mr. Fenwick's office was, after all, next to the health center, and I did feel a kind of sickness that morning, the nervous, hollow kind that comes before you do something you can't undo. His office smelled of old paper and peppermint tea. He had my file already open on the desk, my name typed clean at the top, Whitfield, E. Sole proprietor. I want to understand exactly where I stand, I told him. Not what's kind. Not what's easy on my son. What I'm legally entitled to do. Mr. Fenwick folded his hands. Legally, Mrs. Whitfield, this is straightforward. Raj and Kama have no tenancy agreement, no lease, no license to occupy beyond your goodwill. In the eyes of the law, they are what's called excluded occupiers' guests, essentially, no matter how long they've stayed. You can ask them to leave. If they refuse, you're entitled to change the locks yourself, provided you don't use force or threats to remove them physically. You do not need a court order to reclaim access to your own home from people with no legal right to it. I felt something in my chest loosen slightly, like a held breath finally let go. 8 months of feeling like a trespasser in my own life, and here was a solicitor telling me, plainly, that the law had never actually taken their side. Only my silence had. There is one thing, he added, and I remember bracing myself. Your son. Legally he has no claim either. The deed is solely in your name. Always has been. But emotionally, this will not be simple. You understand that? I did understand it. That was the part no solicitor's letter could soften. We drew up the paperwork that afternoon, a formal notice to vacate, dated and clear, giving Raj and Kama 30 days, more than generous, more than the law even required of me. I asked him also to look into something else, almost as an afterthought, though it turned out to be the detail that mattered most. I asked whether Adam and Priya's names appeared anywhere on any accounts tied to the house utilities, post-redirection, anything that might complicate things later. That's when Mr. Fenwick found it. 11 months earlier, 2 months before Raj and Kama had even lost their flat in Exeter, Adam had contacted my energy supplier and my council tax office and added himself as a secondary contact on both accounts. Not co-owner, not tenant, but enough, apparently, that he'd been quietly receiving duplicate correspondence about my house for almost a year, redirected to his own address, without ever mentioning it to me. I sat very still when Mr. Fenwick told me that, because suddenly the timeline didn't look like an accident anymore. It looked like something planned. Long before Raj and Kama lost their flat, my son had been laying small, invisible groundwork inside my own life. I didn't confront Adam that day. I wanted proof first, not suspicion. I asked Mr. Fenwick to request copies of the correspondence, quietly, through proper channels. Then I drove home with the notice to vacate folded in my handbag like something that might go off if I wasn't careful with it. That evening, dinner was the usual arrangement, Kama and Raj at the table, Priya visiting with little Sana, my granddaughter, who is 4 and the only unclouded joy left in that house. Adam wasn't there. Work kept him late most nights now, or so he said. I watched Kamla serve rice from a pot that used to be mine for Sunday stews in a kitchen where my recipe books had been pushed to the back of a cupboard to make room for hers, and I thought, not much longer now. Sana climbed into my lap after dinner, sticky-fingered and warm, and asked why I looked sad. Children notice everything adults think they're hiding. I told her I wasn't sad, just tired, and she patted my cheek the way she does, like she's the grown-up comforting me, and something in my resolve both softened and hardened at once. Whatever came next, I needed it to protect her, to her sense that this house, her grandmother's house, was still a safe and steady place, not a battlefield. It was 2 nights later that the real blow landed, and it didn't come from Raj or Kamla at all. I'd gone up to bed early with a headache, and through the thin wall between my room and the landing I heard Adam's voice, home late, speaking low to Priya on the stairs. I wasn't trying to listen, but grief and worry make you a light sleeper, and some sentences cut through walls whether you want them to or not. Once Mum's gone, the house comes to me anyway, so it doesn't matter if they're on paper now or later, does it? Easier to sort all that once we're already settled properly. Once Mum's gone, I lay in the dark for a long time after that, staring at the ceiling Malcolm and I had painted together the summer before Adam was born, and I felt something crack quietly inside me, not loud, not dramatic, just final, like a door that had been slowly swinging shut for 8 months finally clicking into its frame. They weren't waiting to be asked to stay longer. They were waiting for me to die. I didn't cry, though I expected to. What I felt instead was a strange, cold clarity, the kind you get in the moment right before you step off a high board after the fear, before the fall. My son, who I had carried, fed, forgiven 100 small selfishnesses because that's what mothers do, was already dividing up my house in his head while I was still very much alive in it. The next morning I called Mr. Fenwick before I'd even had my tea. "Send the notice," I said. "All of it. Effective immediately." "Are you certain?" he asked gently, the way you'd ask someone standing at the edge of something. "I've never been more certain of anything," I told him, and for the first time in 8 months I meant every word of it completely. What I didn't yet know was that the notice to vacate wasn't going to be the surprise that changed everything. That came 4 days later, when I discovered exactly how deep the plan against me had gone and exactly how far I would need to go to take my house and my dignity back. Continuing script part 3 of 4. Target, 1,350 words. The notice to vacate went out on a Thursday, hand-delivered by Mr. Fenwick's clerk, a polite young man who Kamla later told me she'd mistaken for a delivery driver until he asked her to sign for it. I wasn't home when it happened. I'd made sure of that, driving out to Paynton to sit with my sister Marjorie and wait for my phone to start ringing. It rang within the hour. Adam, his voice tight in a way I hadn't heard since he was a teenager, caught out in a lie. "Mum, what is this?" "Priya's dad just showed me some legal letter. He's absolutely gutted. What have you done?" "Not are you all right?" "Not why would you do that?" "What have you done?" As if I were the one who'd taken something. "I've asked them to leave my house, Adam," I said, and my voice came out steadier than I expected. "The house your father and I paid for. The house that has never, not for one single day, belonged to anyone but me. They've got nowhere to go, Mom. You know that. You're being," he stopped himself, but I heard the word anyway, hanging there unsaid. "Cruel, difficult, selfish, take your pick. 30 days is more than fair," I said. "More than the law requires. I've been more than fair for 8 months, Adam. I'd like to be fair to myself now too." He didn't have an answer for that. I think, somewhere underneath the anger, he knew it was true. I told Marjorie everything that afternoon, sitting in her small conservatory with tea going cold between us, the overheard conversation on the stairs. Once Mum's gone, the accounts Adam had quietly attached himself to. She went very pale, then very angry on my behalf, the way sisters do. "You need to tell him what you heard," she said, "not to punish him, so he understands why this isn't really about Raj and Kamla anymore." I wasn't ready to say those words out loud yet. Once Mum is gone, saying it felt like it would make it permanently true between us, an unforgivable sentence spoken instead of just a wound I carried privately. So I held it back a little longer, and instead I focused on the practical. The 4 days after the notice were the hardest of the whole ordeal. Kamla stopped speaking to me entirely, moving through the house with her lips pressed thin and slamming cupboard doors that used to be mine. Raj tried a different approach, reasonable, wounded, appealing to my better nature over breakfast. Eileen, we're not young people. Where do you expect us to go in 30 days? Is this how you repay family? You are not my family, Raj, I said, quiet but clear, the first unkind thing I believe I'd said to him in 8 months. You are my son's wife's parents. I have shown you a kindness for 8 months that most people would never have offered a stranger. That kindness has an end. This it. He didn't have a reply to that either. I think, for the first time, he actually heard me. It was the following Tuesday that I found the thing that changed the shape of everything again. I'd gone looking for my late husband's watch, a small sentimental errand, checking the drawer in the spare room where some of Malcolm's remaining things had been pushed since Raj and Kamla took over that space. Instead of the watch, I found a folder, tucked behind old towels on the top shelf, not hidden exactly, just stored the way you store things you don't think anyone else will ever look for. Inside were printed emails between Adam and a letting agency in Exeter, dated 4 months before Raj and Kamla had supposedly lost their flat. Adam had been in contact with a property manager, discussing in his own words a plan to consolidate the family into Mum's house long-term, since it's underused for one person and will come to us eventually regardless. There was a rough sketch, almost architectural, of my house with a wall proposed through the sitting room to create a self-contained annex for Raj and Kamla. Dated Glen. Long before any landlord in Exeter had supposedly sold up and forced anyone out. There had been no sudden crisis. There had been a plan, and I had simply been the last person told about my own house's future. I sat on the edge of that bed for a long time with the folder in my lap, and something that had been aching in me for 8 months finally, quietly, stopped aching and turned into something colder and more useful. Not rage exactly. Resolve. I photographed every page before I put the folder back exactly where I'd found it. Then I called Mr. Fenwick again. I think I told him, there's more here than a simple notice to vacate is going to solve. He was quiet a moment. What would you like to do, Mrs. Whitfield? I thought of Sana's sticky hand on my cheek, of Malcolm's chair exiled to the garage, of the sentence that still echoed through me at night once Mum's gone, and I said the thing I'd been circling for days without letting myself land on it directly. I want to change my will, today, if possible, and I want it to be airtight, so that whatever anyone plans quietly behind my back, they understand very clearly that this house does not simply pass to people who were already dividing it up while I was still living in it. That's well within your rights, Mr. Fenwick said. Would you like to discuss the specifics now, or would you prefer to bring your son into the conversation first? I looked out at the gray sliver of sea visible from Marjorie's spare room window, thinking of 30 days ticking down like a clock nobody else in that house could hear yet. No, I said, I don't think I'll be discussing this with Adam at all. I think it's time he found out the way I found out everything else in my own house lately, all at once, and far too late to do anything about it. What I didn't yet know, sitting there with that decision made, was that the will wasn't going to be my final move. It was only the beginning of the surprise I had waiting for the day the 30 days finally ran out. The new will took 3 days to finalize. It was simpler than I expected in some ways and harder in others. Mr. Fenwick asked me questions no one else had thought to ask in 8 months, not what would keep the peace, but what would actually protect me and protect Sana's place in this family long after I was gone. I left the house to a trust. Not to Adam outright, not to be divided or annexed or quietly redrawn on someone's sketch of a wall through my sitting room. A trust, with clear terms. The property could never be occupied by anyone outside my direct descendants without my written consent while I lived, and after my death, it would pass to Adam only on the condition that Sana's education and future housing needs were guaranteed from its value first. Raj and Kamla's names appeared nowhere in it. Neither did the word annex. I also did something Mr. Fenwick gently warned me might feel harsh, though it felt, to me, like the only honest thing left to do. I read a letter on a mirror. In it, I wrote about the stairs, about the sentence I'd heard through the wall. Once Mum is gone. I wrote about the folder behind the towels, the emails, the sketch of a wall through the room where his father and I once put up our first Christmas tree. I didn't write it to hurt him, though I knew it would. I wrote it because 30 years of protecting him from consequences had led us both, somehow, to a house where he'd started planning around my death instead of talking to me about my life. The 30 days ran out on a Friday in April, with a kind of golden, undeserved sunshine Torquay sometimes offers right when you least expect kindness from the weather. I didn't gloat. I didn't throw anything. What I had waiting for them wasn't dramatic in the way you might imagine. No shouting. No police at the door, no scene for the neighbors to whisper about over their fences. What I had waiting was simpler and far more final. I'd arranged, quietly, for a removals company to come that morning and carefully box up everything belonging to Raj and Kamla labeled respectful, nothing broken or thrown, and move it into a storage unit I'd paid for a month in advance, along with a note giving them the access code and 30 more days to collect it at their leisure. No cruelty, just clarity. The back door lock, the one they'd changed without asking, I had rekeyed the week before, this time with a copy for myself and no one else. When Kamla came downstairs that morning to find my kitchen quiet and mostly empty of her things, she didn't scream. She looked, for a long moment, almost relieved, as though some private tension in her had been waiting a long time to be resolved by someone else's decision. Raj said very little. He shook my hand, oddly formal, and said, I think we both knew this was overdue, Eileen. It was the most honest thing either of them had said to me in 8 months. Am arrived an hour later, called ahead by Priya in a panic, and found me sitting in the garden on the little bench. Malcolm's chair moved back into its rightful place by the window where I could see it from where I sat. He had the will documents in a hand, and my letter, opened, the paper slightly shambled the way paper gets when someone has read something twice, not quite believing it the first time. You could have just talked to me, he said, and his voice cracked in a way that told me the anger had already burned through and left something rawer underneath. I tried, Adam, for 8 months. You told me to be patient. You told me it wasn't forever. Then I heard you on the stairs, planning what happens after I'm not here to have an opinion about it anymore. I looked at him properly then, my son, 34 years old, still somehow the boy who used to fall asleep against my shoulder on long car journeys. I'm not angry that you'll inherit this house one day, Adam. I always wanted that for you and for Sana. I'm angry that you started dividing it up while I was still living in every room of it. He sat down heavily on the grass beside the bench, not saying anything for a long while. Sana's laughter drifted faintly from somewhere near the back gate, where Priya was pushing her on the little swing Malcolm had built years ago, still hoeing, still safe, still ours. I don't know how to fix this, Adam finally said. You don't fix it today, I told him. You fix it slowly, the way most real things get fixed. You start by asking me how I am, instead of what I've decided. You start by remembering that I'm still here, still living, still allowed to have a say in my own life until the day I'm not. We didn't hug that afternoon. We didn't cry together the way you might hope, watching this unfold from the outside. What we did was sit in the garden as the sun moved lower over the rooftops and talk, properly, for the first time in longer than either of us wanted to admit, about his father, about the house, about what it had actually cost me to stay silent for so long in order to keep a peace that was never really peace at all, just quiet erosion dressed up as patience. Raj and Kamla found a flat of their own within 3 weeks, closer to Priya, which was, in the end, probably where they should have been from the start. We are civil now, when our paths cross at family gatherings. Not close, civil, and honestly, that's enough. I still sit on that garden bench most evenings, tea in hand, watching the gulls wheel over rooftops toward a sea I can't quite see but always know is there. Malcolm's chair sits by the window again, dusted every Sunday, a small ceremony nobody interrupts anymore. I learned something in the house that I don't think you can learn any other way except the hard way. The way I learned it, that love without boundaries isn't kindness. It's just slow disappearance, dressed up in a smile so everyone else can call you patient. I stopped disappearing the day I finally let myself be inconvenient in my own home again. If you've ever felt yourself vanishing quietly inside walls that are legally, rightfully yours, tell me, at what point did you finally decide that being loved and being erased were not, in fact, the same thing?